All right, so in Woke, and by and large, one large conversation. But this is an extra slide. I didn't include this for you guys. This is just for kicks and giggles. Someone had posted a picture of a children's book. It's the Gay BC book. So O stands for orientation. It's a balance between who you are, who you love, and how you want to be seen. P is for pan, not the kind of pan you cook things in, but you connect with the vibe no matter the gender. It's what's in meaning pansexual. So this was this children's book that someone had on the shelf, posted a picture for all of us to revel in it. So plenty of this kind of stuff going around. I got excited when I first saw the book, Everybody Poops, but that's a normal book for kids. That was, a great book. This one's all different. I want to talk about this for a little while because this is a really interesting issue, and it's an interesting issue for 2 or 3 big reasons. So it's called the Abrahamic Family House. It is under construction right now in the UAE. Those 3 buildings there, that's an artist's rendition of the buildings that are currently being built. It is a mosque, a church, and a synagogue, all on one piece of property. This is sponsored by the UAE government. And it's intended to be this place of general worship for people in their nation, and it's connected to all of the Abrahamic faiths, all the major theistic religions that draw their lineage back to Abraham and so forth. So we're all together on one piece of land. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the Abrahamic Family House is that this has become possible because of what were called the Abraham Accords. How many of you heard of the Abraham Accords? So a few did. People did not hear about them. So this is a set of, and you can read them, they're one-page peace accords that were written during the Trump administration. And what they did is they organized these accords between Israel and about half a dozen other Arabic and Islamic nations. And the goal was to create some common ground, to create some peace, to create some open lines of communication. One of the things that resulted from the Abraham Accords was that several nations who have never allowed synagogues to be built in their nation are now building synagogues in their nation, including places like UAE and Saudi Arabia and Sudan. Right, so really interesting thing. In fact, when the Abraham Accords were signed, something like 17 nations actually nominated Trump and his administration for the Nobel Peace Prize. So they thought, well, this is a big enough deal. It should really actually win something significant. The catch is that almost nobody's ever really. It was a really interesting thing, a powerful thing that happened, and a lot of prophecy actually kind of folded into kind of how some end-time events unfold and so forth, and maybe at some point we'll get to that kind of thing. But you can find a lot of information about the Abrahamic. One of the things, I'm sorry this keeps going in and out. This is none of our faults. This is just at least we're not getting a Spanish radio station or the CBs from the truckers on the highway or something like that. This just happens with that from time to time. Okay, that's fine. If you guys grab one of those, just make sure you unmute the line for that mic on that soundboard there in order for this to be used. So what is in many ways a very positive sign of some mutual accords, some desire for peace talk back and forth. What is positive in the one hand gets used in the other hand to begin talking about we are all one faith. It's on. There we go. All right, I can drop that. Very nice. We are all one faith. We are all one religion kind of talk, okay? So there's always this thrust underneath the surface to treat peace between different faiths as requiring the elimination of our doctrinal distinctives. We can't really meet each other in the middle. We really can't talk to each other unless we get sort of fuzzy about some of our doctrinal distinctives and so forth. That's the only real way for us to get along. That kind of talk is always present when it comes to initiatives like this. What has become interesting because of this sort of thing and a few other rather powerful individuals is that talk is not underneath the surface anymore or in what are traditionally left-leaning ecumenical councils. It's becoming more and more prominent all the time. So the Pope and one of the primary imams, I believe, of Saudi Arabia, I might be wrong about where he is from, they have joined together to put together something called the Higher Committee to Implement the Document on Human Fraternity. Now, if that's not a cool name, I don't know what is. You want to be the chief director of vice implementation of the Higher Committee to Implement the Document on Human Fraternity, right? You want that on your business card. But they've joined together to put this together, and this has been going on for a couple years now. So LifeSite News, which actually does a really good job on reporting on religious issues and international religious issues, wrote this: a multi-faith higher committee was announced this week to implement the Human Fraternity document signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam in February that stated, among other things, that a, quote, pluralism and diversity of religions is willed by God. The document itself, again, it's online, and you print it out. It's maybe a two-sided sheet of paper. It's not very long. And again, you read through a lot of it, and you think, hey, who could be against this kind of stuff? We don't want to be shooting each other in the streets anymore. We don't want religion starting wars anymore. And, you know, I mean, if we go back 500, 600, 700 years, we've got religions, right? We've got those kinds of wars going on as well. We don't want any of that happening at all. We want to mutually respect one another. Then the last third or so of the document are all these bullet points, these things that they affirm. And one of the things that they affirm inside of that document is that a pluralism and diversity of religions on the face of the planet amongst human beings is willed by God. Now, in an interview, and Pope Francis was pressed about that, what do you mean by this is the will of God? Pope Francis says, well, that bullet point means what we call the permissive will of God. Okay, now that's a theological nuance to this. Now, let me explain that because this is important. The theological nuance then is, well, God permits evil. God permits all kinds of things that are not in his perfect will. So we're going to say that in God's permissive will, we've got all of this pluralism of religions. The reason that quote is not put together is that what comes after a pluralism and diversity of religions is also things like male and female. That the differences between men and women, or God creates men and women, are part of, are, quote, willed by God. So if Pope Francis wants to say that a pluralism of religions is the permissive will of God, then he also has to say that the creation of men and women as two distinct kinds of things are also the permissive will of God, not the perfect will of God, which is an untenable position to hold. So he's gotten himself in a bit of a mess here. And Pope Francis tends to do that, tends to get himself inside of these sort of theological messes. And we think, we want to be kind, we want to be charitable, we want to be flexible with Pope Francis and what he believes. And then on September 26th, 2021, he tweeted this: today the church is called to go out to the streets of the existential peripheries. I don't know, you just got to love language like that, right? To heal the wounded and seek the lost without prejudices or fear, without proselytism, but ready to expand her tent to welcome everyone in an ever larger we. What's the first subclause in that sentence that strikes you? Well, yeah, right, existential, right? Without proselytism, we're trying to invite people into an ever-expanding we. They're all in. They're all in. Everybody's welcome. We are all here. We will not proselytize. The hashtag is WDMR2021. I have no clue. I honestly don't know. That's a good question. But I answered your question technically, right? There you go. See, that's what a smartphone is for. So proselytizing is telling someone else about the good news of Jesus Christ. We believe he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that you need to know him in order to have life abundantly here and eternal life with him forever. And so the Pope says we go out into the streets and we seek the lost to draw them into ourselves, but we're not going to do that. Why not? Right? So we've gotten ourselves in kind of this really fuzzy world with these kinds of statements and so forth. And so in this kind of context, I want to flesh out a couple more thoughts about wokeism and traditional religion, the relationship between this growing worldview of wokeism, and we keep fleshing this out. We spend a lot of time with the people who teach us and what they say and what it means, and its relationship with the traditional religions of the world, especially the theistic religions, but then the other large major religions of the world. So wokeism and their take on the traditional theistic religions. And you find this just kind of both on a popular level and on a serious level as these individuals write about how the world should be ordered. We've talked about the first one a lot. Christianity is just oppressive. It's colonizing, it's white European, it's destroyed a lot of cultures, it continues to destroy cultures, and we've learned the equation of something can be labeled as oppressive, it is therefore morally evil and has to be gotten rid of, right? So Christianity is oppressive. That is the fundamental take of wokeism on Christianity. The Jews are the bad guys. It is old-timey, hardcore anti-Semitism. And it just keeps showing up in our culture more and more, right? I'm not trying to sort of jump on anybody or get hyper-political, but when the Iron Dome was funded for Israel, that we would actually sell them missiles to protect them from the missiles that Palestine, throws over the border, AOC made sure she got a picture of her crying when that happened. It's just an emblem of the anti-Semitism that is inside of the Western world today. Something else interesting that happens with wokeism and the racial divisions. It's not just black and white. You ask yourself questions like, well, do Jews count as white? Well, what about Asian races and so forth? This is the language that you will hear them use. Groups of people like that, ethnicities like that, especially if they are successful. And there's something like 12 different East Asian ethnicities that are more successful than whites in the U.S., something like 12 of them. Now, the reason they don't count as people of color is they are what the woke call white adjacent ethnicities. They are white. See? Hey, man, doing that to your hair has made you sharp, even sharper. Get directly into my brain. A white adjacent ethnicity. If you're not erasing people's backgrounds and ethnicities by doing that, I don't know what else you're doing, right? But all that means is you're successful, and so we want to put you in the pile of oppressors, even though you're not technically white. So traditional anti-Semitism is still wide awake in this world. And then interestingly enough, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Muslims are oppressed by the West. So if the West, dominated by Christianity, are the oppressors, that's the bad guys, Muslims, Islam, oppressed by the West, that makes them the innocent victims. That makes them the good guys. That's why, by and large, we cannot talk about the evils that occur amongst Islam or their aggression and on, right? So we have this weird alliance between wokeism and the hardcore political left and Islam because of beliefs like this. All right, we keep touching on this kind of thing, but I want to make sure that we see it again tonight. And I've got a video to show you guys. I'm so glad we get to watch this video tonight. But let's recognize this. Wokeism is a replacement religion. It's not another idea. It's not even a secular religion. It is a replacement religion full of all the beliefs and mechanisms necessary for a religion. Rituals, insiders and outsiders, salvation, forgiveness, redemption, the scapegoat, utopia, all of these things that we would say, so the Christian faith, the traditional faiths make sense of or produce doctrines about. Wokeism does exactly the kind of thing. So the more wokeism becomes the acceptable or the dominant worldview inside of a culture, theistic religion has no place there unless it eliminates its doctrinal distinctives. If you can get rid of doctrinal distinctives, then those old theistic religions can just sort of be absorbed right into the woke worldview. So we begin to get rid of doctrinal distinctives about human sexuality, the shape of the human family, the uniqueness of Jesus Christ. And we've talked about this it's a very powerful issue, how forgiveness does and does not work, how grace does and does not work, who is the scapegoat that fixes everything. All of these doctrinal distinctives need to be erased, and then these religions can slip naturally inside of the woke worldview, because the woke worldview just does not brook rivals. It stands on its own and will only stand on its own. But without, and I think in this room, by and large, we understand this, without doctrinal boundaries, theistic religions are susceptible to being colonized by the dominant worldview of the age. So if we let go of those boundaries, if we let go of those hardcore beliefs that we have about the uniqueness of Christ, the difference between heaven and hell, life with God, when we let go of those things, we become susceptible to being colonized by these other worldviews. Now, sometimes we'd say, well, it almost turns into like a slippery slope. You let go of one doctrine, and then you're going to let go of another, then you're going to let go of another, and down the hill you go. So we say that kind of thing a lot. And then I ran across this video. Now, let me explain this video to you really quick before we watch it. A little while ago, and I believe this is just within a few months. It might be a little older than that, maybe not. But a pastor by the name of Ryan Meeks, who pastored a megachurch in the Seattle area called Eastlake Church. They planted the church. It became this huge church. And then it became the first evangelical megachurch to announce that it was going to become queer affirming. And so then all sorts of things start happening with the church. He retired from that church recently, and so he shot his own video about his experience and what the choices he made and what he went through. The video that we're going to watch takes that video that he shot and splices it with other media videos of his, and so on and so forth to help describe the journey that he took. So let's watch this video and see what you guys think.
We became the largest evangelical, open and affirming church. And from there, we really made a lot of shifts. And all of a sudden, I think we were something like a progressive Christian church. I don't know what we ended up, a not church or some sort of interfaith spiritual goulash. The slippery slope is real. When I think back of the many iterations of what Eastlake has been, I mean, you think about any point in time. At one point, you could have called us a tiny fledgling church plant, and then we were a purpose-driven church health award winner in 2006, and we were one of Outreach Magazine's fastest growing churches in America, and we were a multi-site evangelical megachurch, and we were a hologram church. That didn't work. That's one of the funny ones. At one point we became the largest evangelical open and affirming church. I cannot bear to move forward in my life a part of a faith community where my friends are not welcomed to both serve and receive communion, to have equal welcome into the community of Christianity, of following Jesus. From this point forward, we're going to keep doing what we've always done as we aim for Jesus, as we aim for the embodiment of the kingdom among us, reconciliation, renewal, and restoration for the flourishing of all people. That's where we're headed, to Jesus, to the kingdom, to the beauty and the work of Christ in all things. And from there, we really made a lot of shifts, and all of a sudden, I think we were something like a progressive Christian church, and then we were a rapidly declining church. And I don't know what we ended up, a not church or some sort of interfaith spiritual goulash. It's been wild. And when I think back through all of that, I'm just amazed. But I also learned that the slippery slope is real. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I know that phrase is used negatively, but sometime if I write a book, I may have a chapter called My Fantastic Ride Down the Slippery Slope, because it's true. It's been wild, and it's certainly come with pain, but as I look back on it now, I realize that what I thought was losing my faith was actually losing my faith tradition, but my faith itself was growing beyond the boundaries of that faith tradition. I didn't lose my faith. I lost my fear. Love expanded beyond these sort of narrow confines and moved me into freedom. I might say I once was found, but now I'm free. And it's been so beautiful to go through that experience.
He makes one of the standard mistakes that's made inside of this point of view. And that is, to love someone is to affirm everything about their behavior. And making that doctrinal mistake and that emotional mistake leads him down this path. And I've got to tell you, I didn't mean to offend you, Heather. No, I know you're leaving for work. Forgot your coffee. That's important stuff. I watch this kind of stuff, and there are things in there, it breaks my heart, but then my skin crawls. I once was found, and now I'm free. I didn't lose my faith, but it went beyond the boundaries and has grown so much. It just means it's nothing at all anymore. And he's perfectly happy with it, right? So that fits perfectly inside of the woke. The woke world is not bothered by that guy at all, right? So he's lost all those doctrinal boundaries, and so he slips right into it without any problems whatsoever. If you're weird like me and you like watching more and more videos like that, there's a great follow on Twitter. His name is Woke Preacher Clips. It's an anonymous account, but he tracks this kind of stuff and he puts these things together. And so there's a lot more of it out there than you might even imagine. So, a couple of other thoughts about this issue of wokeism, its relationship to traditional Christianity, what all of this means. We've looked at these books in a couple of other ways, but I want to come back to some thoughts. This one here, Awake Not Woke, by Noelle Maring. She's actually a Catholic theologian, and it's a wonderful little book. And she says this: though its roots in history are atheistic, woke ideology takes on the manner and characteristics of a fundamentalist religion. It has its dogmas, and denunciations. It replaces the struggle against sin with struggle sessions. Its vision is messianic, its dogmas unquestionable. But rather than an eternal end, it finds and administers salvation and damnation in this world. And it co-opts the culture, it co-opts Christians, but it does so parasitically. Woke Christianity, if such a thing might be said to exist at all, will inevitably reject Christ in all but name. So that video is exactly a representation of what she has just described here. So it's a parasitic worldview, and it will even sneak inside of congregations, and it will make this kind of thing happen. A book that is about, this surprised me, a book by a Hindu. Vivek Ramaswamy identifies himself as a Hindu, and this is about wokenomics or the woke worldview inside of businesses and so forth. He has 2 chapters on why wokeism is a religion. And the second chapter actually builds a legal case about wokeism as a religion. So he builds a legal case in one of these chapters about why you cannot be fired if you reject your company's diversity program. Because what they're doing is they're forcing their religious point of view on you. It's a really interesting thing that he goes through there. But here's part of what he says. It's not a religion I subscribe to, but wokeness really is a religion. Wokeness touches every part of its disciples' lives. Like any other religion, being woke isn't supposed to be a narrow, one-off commitment. It's supposed to be a way of life. It gives its believers purpose and meaning. It's the structure that they use to make sense of the universe. Where a non-woke person sees ordinary interactions, for instance, a disciple of wokeness sees microaggressions. Just as a Christian sees God's hand in all of creation, someone who's woke sees the guiding hand of identity-based power relations everywhere they look. So he's making the argument, it really is a way of seeing everything that happens. And we've talked about this, and we've read about this, that every relationship is a power struggle. Every relationship is a battle of intersectionality. Every relationship is a certain kind of expression of racism and oppression, and we have to be made aware of that, and on and on and on and on. And he actually compares that to a Christian's point of view of God's sovereign hand in all things. He says, just like Christians see that, the woke see this hand of power and oppression inside of absolutely everything. So it's not just a bunch of Christians who are upset at wokeism that are making the case that it's a religion. It's becoming more and more apparent to people who actually deal with this kind of stuff and spend time with it. So it's significant to recognize the relationship between this growing worldview that we keep trying to make sense of and how it interacts with traditional faith and the kinds of pressures that puts on you and me, the kinds of pressures that puts on the church, the kind of pressures that puts on pastors. In order for a pastor to be relevant and up to date now, you need to start talking about these kinds of things. You need to implement these kinds of policies. You need to use this kind of language. You need to start a sermon series on social justice, and it needs to look like this. These kinds of pressures, I can tell you, are out there, and a lot of people are leaning that direction, or they've bought all the way in. It's this parasitic worldview that wants to get inside the church and actually change things. All right, so let's just continue to be aware of what's going on and recognize that this is a full-bodied religious worldview that we're dealing with, and there really isn't anything in it that is compatible with the Christian faith.